right, it's July 10th, 2016. This is your Mountain State Update. I'm John Cantees, and I'm being joined by Dan Heyman.
West Virginia correspondent for the Public News Service.
Absolutely. And Ted Boettner's here.
Occasional writer for the New York Times. And
All
Ted
right.
Boettner.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Executive Director of the...
West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy.
That's it.
Yep.
I'm glad you said it. Yeah. Well, it's been a while since you've been on, and I had it memorized like a song. And it went away, though. I don't remember. I forgot it. So I'm glad you came on. You could say it for me. How's it going, Ted?
It's going well. Thank you guys for having me.
So we're going to talk about Brexit, but first I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Dallas. This is well, sure, but I also want to, because this is something that obviously it affects us from a law enforcement and a security standpoint, but this is going to have a bigger cultural impact on us long term.
I think so.
And I want to hear what you guys think about where we're going to go from here, culturally speaking. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm seeing this polarizing of views. You're either for cops or you're for Black Lives Matter, which of course is ridiculous. But that seems, I see this polarization happening, and I want to hear what you guys think when it comes to where we're going culturally with this.
Well, I have 2-3 semi-conflicting thoughts. One is that, I heard a guy on the radio the other day who said, "What good is another hashtag at this point?" And that kind of struck me right. That I felt like there wasn't a lot that I could add to the conversation that wasn't already being said. I mean, what are we going to say? Hashtag don't kill each other. That's kind of the point where we are. But that's sort of emblematic of a broader problem, which is that we've kind of hit a point where we now need to step from discussion and outrage into policy.
Right.
And I think that as terrible as the assassinations of the police in Dallas were, that it's kind of made that inevitable. We can no longer just have the same discussion again and again and again. We're now, I think we're at the point where people realize that we have to do something. Now, that said, the killings were tragic in 2 ways. For one thing, the only impact on policing that shooting a bunch of cops is going to have is it's going to make the police more wary, which when you have police who are acting on their, let's say, racial assumptions in a traffic stop or some interaction with a person that they don't know, if they're more wary, then I think it's likely that they're going to be more likely to react badly.
Right. Like anybody would. I mean, that's not a policeman thing. That's a human being thing.
Well, yeah,
right.
And I mean, the underspoken assumption to that is that we all have racial attitudes that we have to deal with. And as Ted and I have had this discussion before, I mean, I have racial assumptions. I'm a little bit racist, like the song, like the Puppet song says.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of where I am with that. I mean, there's other things to say, but I'm not sure how productive they are.
Ted, what do you think as far as the cultural impact on this? And I mean, there's policy proposals out there that I think the Black Lives Matter movement has endorsed. What do you think about moving forward with this situation?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I mean, you have these different circumstances happening, but I think what you are going to have to do is address the large racial inequities in our police force system and in our society as a whole. And I feel like a lot of people for the last couple of years, along with the Black Lives Matters movement, which I got to I got to moderate a panel with somebody from the Black Lives Matters movement last year and had a really good time understanding where they're coming from and what somebody in my position can do to help with their efforts as well. But the very first thing we need to do is really listen, and there needs to be leadership within the police community too on that issue, and with people that are in political power. You see a huge silence across the board, especially of conservatives, of not saying anything of redirecting that anger towards that means against cops, and we're not addressing that fundamental issue.
I've noticed that the candidates are mysteriously just completely silent on this.
Well, it's hard.
I guess they see nothing to be gained.
What are you going to say? I mean, what are you going to say? It's tragic. And I mean, one of the things that's tragic about this is that the Dallas Police Department is one of those that has actually tried to wrestle with this issue and has tried to develop a better relationship and a better record on race issues than most. And so now that effort runs the risk of being set back, let alone the tragedy of those deaths. And there are departments that have done better and worse jobs of this, but it is, as Ted says, reflective of a broader shift that is taking place or not taking place in this country. I mean, there are places where I'm reminded a little bit. I don't want to, draw too much of a comparison with, the bathroom bill in North Carolina, where people are talking about transgender, do they have the right to use the same bathrooms as everybody else? Or do they use the bathroom according to their genetic,
their birth certificate,
or according to what they choose? And apparently there are some parts of this country, as you would expect, San Francisco, but also other cities in the sort of more urban, maybe more metropolitan kind of attitudes, where they regard that as no big deal, where they've had those kinds of, choose the bathroom you want attitudes for a long time. And similarly, you have some police departments in the U.S. where they have really gone out of their way to kind of try to address this, and other departments have not. And it's difficult to get it. It reflects a broader. It reflects the attitudes of the community. It reflects the attitudes of the broader population. It reflects the attitudes of the power structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that needs to be addressed is the systematic problem that's happening and the denial from so many people, especially white people and white men, denying the fact of white privilege, what that means, denying the fact of white supremacy that's been a fabric of our nation. It helped start capitalism,
acting like it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and just a complete lack of history. Especially libertarians are infamous for not understanding history and bringing that.
Everyone's
into the
on the exact same.
Yeah, we're all on the same
field.
page. Nothing happened before. We're all here.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that, and to really get at the problem in the long term, I think you need to break down those structures. Context. So I think from an early age, you need to, just people who go around the country. I know of people I've talked to who work with police departments, help them understand racial profiling, diversity training can be better, but there are those things have to take place. Even at high school age or junior high, people have to be aware of what's around them. So when we talk about white privilege, when I go outside this building today, it's pretty easy for me to exercise that privilege in the next hour when I walk out of this building, but I need to have an understanding that I'm doing that.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of people, especially it's hard to talk to people who are not seeing their incomes improved, not seeing their well-being improved, to think about those things. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But I think we try to do that through the education system to help people understand the privileges that you do have in society, and not to be manipulated by the people, I would say, on the top, the elites, trying to control situations by using race to divide people instead of moving towards more pluralistic society of people integrated and working together.
Right. Now, I'm modestly optimistic about this. I mean, for example, the Grand Poobah here at WTSQ, Chris Long, has said that he thinks that the Black Lives Matter movement is the result of changing technology, which has put a camera in everyone's pocket.
Sure.
And I think that's part of it, but I also think that there has been a slow impact of electing an African American that has forced white America to examine its feelings about race. And as to build on what Ted was saying, if you look historically at the figures of American past, it's almost, Thomas Jefferson you can almost see the entire prism of American race through Thomas Jefferson's life. He himself said that slavery is America's original sin. And yet he was a slave owner. And yet he had a relationship with at the very least, a terrible power disparity with one of his female slaves, and when she was very young. And this was apparently not only, I would say, accepted, but almost expected, shall we say, that a male landowner, a wealthy male white landowner, would operate this prerogative. Now, in the 200 and something years since that time, we have gradually expanded the definition of democracy in this country to include more and more people more completely. And this has been the great American project.
We're on the correct trajectory.
But
I
it has
think
to,
so.
it has to go up and down, not just in the polity, but within organizations. Like we are three white men sitting here.
Right.
Why
Exactly.
isn't there somebody else of color to talk about? I mean, that's what I'm saying. In your daily life, you have to bring that lens into thinking about these issues.
Well, there's a glass ceiling to break.
I'm
there.
guilty too. I'm not throwing any blame. I'm just saying those are the kinds of things that we all have to be thinking about at all times to really make a dent.
I mean,
in changing this.
Ted's organization, this was a couple of years ago. I mean, we have to give credit where credit is due. You were working on, was it Race Matters in Appalachia, which is a great sort of play on words, that the organization was called Race Matters. And it was about, how is this impacting us? And that was before the rise of Donald Trump, which a lot of people are saying is essentially white privilege backlash.
Right. Sure.
And there's a definite element of that, and but to get past just talking about it is not easy. A lot of places have tried this, and they've had greater or lesser success, but it's a slow, difficult process of actually putting our beliefs into action.
I think too it thrives in inequality. So you have an environment where people's like white male men in West Virginia haven't seen their wages increase in over 40 years,
Right.
adjusted for inflation. These types of things. Now you have two parents working, barely getting by, barely, and they're working more hours. These environments create, I think,
a level of resentment.
and that is, I almost think, the product of that can be these racist behaviors that people take on.
Sure.
Well, it's one of the. I mean, it's the natural tendency if you're just hanging on by your fingernails, is to say, here comes Big Brother, and they're going to take away what little I have, and they're going to give it to somebody else. Well, I'm not. I don't have a piece of the pie. I mean, this is tangentially something that the president referred to, and it's sort of a well-understood historical pattern, but I think it's something that we haven't entirely faced in this country, which is that for a long time, the power structure has used racial division to keep sort of a class hierarchy which benefits those at the top. In other words, poor white farmers in the South were taught that they had a position of privilege and they were at a level of advantage because they weren't black. And that kept them from questioning the economic hierarchy that had the planters at the top.
Sure. And this also creates a space where, and a mindset where somebody can come along and make these big, broad statements and say, I'm going to fix it all, I'm going to take care of it, I'm going to do it, and then they believe it and they latch on to it because, wow, this is the only hope I have.
Yeah.
And so then you have your
Yeah,
chumps.
well, I mean, there are clear patterns. Ted may know more about this than I do, but for example, the populist movement in the South was an integrated movement from the beginning. Similarly to one of my favorite examples, the United Mine Workers was integrated. From the the UMWA was integrated from the day it was founded. And in 1890, which is really the at the point of the highest intensity, of what has been described as terrorist organizations like the Klan suppressing through violence, suppressing African Americans. But the UMWA and the progressive movement really were they just out of maybe in their DNA and in their instinct, a lot of them transcended a lot of the racial boundaries. One of the results of the progressive movement in the South, which was largely an agricultural movement, being integrated, was that the power structure reacted by increasing this intentional division, so that they, in a sense, they broke the progressive movement in the South by using race
to hang on to the.
Well, I think so. I mean,
was.
Ted may know more about this history than I do, but that's basically what I remember from my reading.
And I do want to get into this more next week. We'll get into it more, but right now I want to get into Brexit, because this is something that we're all policy wonks here, and we now have policy wonk king Ted Boettner.
Yes, that's right.
And,
he's one of the finest wonks in the state.
And this is
he's in the wonk Olympics.
Oh, this is pretty good company here, guys.
Right? Yeah, I know, we're bad.
And you can follow us on @MountainStateUp on Twitter. Twitter is very useful because this is how you get Ted Boettner on the show. You challenge him on Twitter.
That's right.
But we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and then we're going to talk about Brexit with Ted Boettner. We'll be right back on the Mountain State Update on WTSQ 88.1 Charleston. Okay, we're back with Mountain State Update. This is July 10th, 2016. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more about what happened in Dallas. And because I want to bring in Erin Brewster from The Brew. You may know her if you listen to WTSQ very often at all. She's going to come on, and we're going to talk to her a little bit. She's called in. We're screening her right now. And Erin, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, and don't swear.
Please not. So what's up? Okay, so you want to talk a little bit about race relations and what happened in Dallas and Black Lives Matter and all that. What do you think about all this culturally and in whatever terms you're thinking of it as?
Well, we talked a little bit about it on my show, which was just before your show, and Dan mentioned something in particular that I had a question about because my co-host and I didn't know anything about it, and I know that Dan said that Dallas was one of the few police departments that had made some affirmative steps with regard to, I guess, working on race relations. And I have heard very little about that, and that was one of the things that we commented on. I would think that police departments in every city in the United States, fearing that they would be the next Baton Rouge, being afraid to be the next Ferguson, would be having come to Jesus talks with all of their officers with regard to how to react. And apparently Dan knows that Dallas is a place where that has been done, but I have not heard that publicized to myself. Are there places that are doing that, and is it being covered by the media and I'm just missing it?
It's been a slow movement. I think really it's actually probably got deeper roots than we realize. I mean, in a way, it probably even goes back to the Watts riots of the 60s, but certainly to the Rodney King beating in California and L.A. And what happened is that the smart departments, the well-run departments, looked at this. That's a pejorative statement, but that some of the departments, some of the police departments, especially the ones in cities where they had a high minority population, looked at this and said, we have to address it. And so they made steps like emphasizing community policing, having meetings with stakeholders. And then this is probably, correlating a little bit with the more liberal urban areas, although not entirely. I mean, we have seen that, for example, Charleston, South Carolina, like Dallas, Dallas has an African-American police chief. Charleston, South Carolina had, I don't know if they still do, but they had a long-time African-American police chief who was very charismatic, interesting guy, used to ride around on roller skates, I think, rollerblades, to talk to people. And you know, it wasn't really that it wasn't a silver bullet, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't easily come by. But for example, the ACLU, taking a look at police shootings in Philadelphia, has undertaken a series of lawsuits against the city of Philadelphia, where actually the police department was cooperating to a degree. And one of the things that they wanted to reduce the number of shootings in Philadelphia, police shootings in Philadelphia. And one of the things that they've done, and I think this references something that Ted was saying, is that they have undertaken a program to increase the minority representation in the police department. And again, I don't think this is a cure by itself, but along with community policing, along with better oversight, community management, there are some police boards that will integrate stakeholders into the police power structure. Integrating more minority police officers. The assumption is not entirely accurate, but it's there that it says that if you're stopped by an African American policeman, he has a similar set of experiences. Or if there's a patrol car that's riding around with two cops in it, and one of them is a member of a minority group, then he's going to know, he's going to reduce the kind of, perhaps racist assumptions.
Sure. Aaron, are you still there?
Yes.
I heard a little something this morning. I think actually may have seen it pop up last night. This is more specifically about the Dallas situation, where they used a robot to get this guy. And there was some backlash to that. Like it's kind of comparing it to using a drone in the Middle East or something like that. Aaron or Ted, even if you want to jump in on this, are these concerns legitimate? Because to me, it seems like if you're shooting at policemen, the policemen are going to kill you, and that's just the way that's the way it is. And this guy was shooting at policemen, and regardless of whether or not they killed him with a robot or with a gun, it seems like that's kind of immaterial. Seems immaterial to me. But what do you guys think of that? Because
anybody who shoots a cop is not going to come to trial.
That's what I mean. That's kind of how I feel. Regardless of whether or not they use a robot or a gun or whatever.
I think there is a really broad point to make of the militarization of our police departments.
Absolutely,
that's the point to be made. I mean, I think having ability to equipment like that, I think people were shocked. Wow, we have like little robots that can go in and blow up. Like and you see these huge assault vehicles and all of these things. Like, when did this happen? I mean, I think
the armored vehicles and the grenade launchers and stuff like that.
What people were saying in Ferguson, and this is interesting because
a lot of it's like leftover military equipment. That a lot of these things
right.
I mean, there is a discussion after the Rodney King riots in L.A. where African Americans in Los Angeles were saying, "Look, this is an occupying army." In some neighborhoods in Los Angeles, the police are like an occupying army, and the reaction. There were two choices that the police department could take. They could sort of increase the militarization and increase the aspect of being like an occupying army, or they could sort of break down those walls and engage in more community policing. One problem is that it takes. Okay, so it's cheap to get a armored personnel carrier, and it makes the cops feel powerful if they have that capability.
And safe. It makes them feel safe.
Makes them feel safe, and it's cheap because they buy it from the Pentagon at a discount. But what it takes to do community policing is it takes more cops.
Sure. Aaron, where do you fall down on that?
I mean, I agree that there are. I agree, first of all, that once you start shooting at cops, that your ability to resist is immaterial. It doesn't
right
matter
or
what
wrong,
you're using.
yeah.
It makes no difference. You're done. But I think it's tough to say on the one hand that we believe as police forces that what will really solve this problem is community policing, as you said, and at the same time, what we spend our money on are these high-tech gadgets, when what we need are officers on the streets. I mean, I know that budgets have been slashed everywhere, and, you know, I don't know that if we consider this a major problem, I don't know that is necessarily the best use of our money.
Erin, when can people find your show? When can they listen to your show?
They can listen to my show at 10 a.m. on Sundays, just before your show.
Thanks for coming on, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
I was gonna.
Oop, let me bring your mic back up here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say one thing to that too. It's important for us to look outward too, as why as the United States uniquely have police forces that carry so many guns. When you go to Europe and other places, you just don't see this type of activity, and you also see.
We're a heavily armed, militarized society,
which is unique among industrialized countries. That's where we need to set out, not to go all Bernie bro here on everybody.
Hey, Bernie bro.
All right,
why don't
Bernie,
you watch it there, Bernie bro?
Let's look at Finland. What do? I don't think they have cops going around with machine guns.
But we're not Finland.
Yeah.
Part of that is, unfortunately,
but why not?
You know, people say that
those are policy choices. That's what I'm saying. Those are policy. Those are
policy choices, but they're historically based. I mean, a big part of the reason why the Second Amendment included that provision about a well-regulated militia.
So, okay, let's get into Brexit. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I want to get into it as much as we can. Do we have differing opinions on this at this table, at this moment?
I'm interested in hearing what Ted has to say, because he's much more of an expert than I am.
Ted,
I don't know about that, Dan.
give me some words.
Some words. This thing on? I'm just kidding. So, I mean, I don't think it was a good idea to leave the European Union at this point. I think there are some deep-seated problems within the Union, especially a lot of their austerity policies and the neoliberalism architecture of what's been going on. I mean, the saving grace for Britain, unlike Greece, was Britain had its own currency, the pound, which helped shield it from a lot of those really harsh practices. But I think the instability and the political vacuum that's happening in England especially is very bad. It's very hard to see what's going to happen. And what you saw, I mean, the coalitions, if you look at the Vote Leave coalition made up of very hard right Tories, Conservatives, and then you had the Stronger Britain coalition, I think it was called, that wanted to remain. Was made up of an interesting group. It was Labour, a sort of establishment conservative party. Even the Greens wanted to stay. And then you did have like the Lexit, which was like the Socialist Revolutionary Party or something like that, sort of internationalists that also wanted to leave because of those austerity policies. But when you go through the votes, too, it's just very fascinating to see like the white working class poor voted to leave. Right. If you look at Britain and London, where there's a high share of people of color and immigrant population, they voted to stay. When you looked at Northern Ireland, they voted to stay. Looked at Scotland, they voted to stay. And it's just interesting when all of this blew up, and a lot of things have happened since then. They've been trying to oust Corbyn out of the Labour Party. We're not sure who the new prime minister is going to be because of that vacuum of power that's been pulled out. I don't think Boris is planning on taking the role as prime minister.
He just wanted to mess things up.
So it really destabilized both parties, I think, in a big way. And we're seeing a little bit of that in the United States. I think that's why we're so fascinated by it. But there's no doubt that the exit campaign was predicated on xenophobia, racism, and mostly centered on the open door policy of immigration. That was sort of the hinge. The thing. And it's also very true that the austerity policies and the plight of working class families in Britain over the last 30 years, very similar to the United States, have seen a drop in compensation, a drop in
industrialization.
And there's a right to be upset about those things. And the European Union is part of the problem in that regard in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, they had some gripes, that I kind of saw where they were coming from. Maybe not enough to leave the European Union over. Maybe it was an overreaction, but I did understand where frustration was coming from in terms of the bureaucracy and all that.
Because the left wasn't organized.
Right.
Like, if you were like, let's say you're far left, you're like, yes, let's
welcome
exit.
to the left.
Yes. Well, I mean, like, I'm not, advocating that position. But even let's say
they're
you
unorganized, is all I'm
there is
saying.
no party structure to pick up the power. If you were voting yes, let's exit. Well, what you're going to get is hardcore Thatcherism.
Right.
With the new Tories that
Right.
support it. That's what you're getting. You're not going to get like
hardcore Thatcherism and xenophobia added on top.
You're not going to get a progressive platform out of it.
Right.
That's what I kept saying. I was
Right.
like, I don't understand what you get out of the exit, because politically, the hard right, way farther to the right than David Cameron,
Right.
is going to assume power. So I don't understand what the benefits.
It seems to me. I mean, the reaction I've been having, at least since the vote, and I don't pretend to have any expertise on this. But it's you Brexit, you bought it. I mean, what happened after it happened made me think that to a certain degree this was a protest vote that succeeded. And then once it happened, everybody said, "Holy crud! What do we do now?" I mean, what? Now that we've caught the, it's like the dog that catches the pickup truck, is the old political cliche. What happens after the dog catches the pickup truck? What does it do?
Right. I mean, they had their tantrum and broke everything in the room, and now they're looking around at all the broken stuff. Like, well, what do we do now?
What do we do now?
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's going to be as. I mean, Ted and I were talking when the mics were off about these economic models that suggested that there's going to be a 5% reduction.
OECD did a little model saying 5% drop in GDP growth.
Is that just England or
No, it was just the UK.
Yeah.
Due to the downfall of trade liberalization within that country. And
That sounds high to me.
Oh, I think it's totally high. I think in the short term, I mean, we've seen a huge drop in the pound, and what that usually leads to is an increase and a decrease in the trade deficit and an increase in manufacturing and exports within the country. So that's usually a good thing. That's something I advocated in the United States. Well, we don't need a stronger dollar. We need kind of a weaker dollar to push out exports. So we have huge trade deficits, plus currency manipulation. I mean, there's always problems with that. But I think over the long term, you might see some things that could be to long-term failure. It all depends. Britain could end up with sort of an European Economic Area agreement like Norway.
Sure.
And that could help out a little bit, but...
And that will
Obviously-
probably happen, I would imagine.
Well, that's what they want.
some point.
I think what
This
people
is-
are really scared about is the domino effect.
Yeah.
The European Union is probably like, oh gosh, Britain's going, are we going to lose these other countries to this? And I think that's why they've been so hardcore. Like the Chancellor was like, we're going to punish Britain for this.
Right.
And I think that's the opposite thing that should happen. They have to understand, too, that a lot of this, especially the European central banks, brought this on themselves when they pursued these harsh austerity policies. So let's paint the picture for the working class person in rural England. They've seen their wages decline, compensation. They've also seen a decrease in social welfare along with that. At the same time, they've seen this huge influx of immigration into their area. So they're
so scared of that.
They're scared of that, and they're like, that's why, yes, we need to fight for what we have and keep it. Well, I'm not saying it's rational complete, but
that's where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's where they're coming from. So I think there is same with the Trump supporters. There are some legitimate things that are going on in West Virginia, for instance, when people are like, just somebody tell me they're going to do something,
Which is interesting you bring up that connection, because I'm thinking, now I'm not as deep in European politics as I probably should be. I don't know a lot about it. But this does seem to me like this is connected to Donald Trump. And I want to know what you think about the degree of that connection, because there is an isolationist wave kind of going, and it's not stopping at the shores of America. This is
Instead of building that
affecting
wall,
everybody.
we're leaving the union.
Sure.
Well, holy crap, they built the wall.
Yeah, I think that what part of what's going on here, and this is something that's people, for example, there was some essays in the Guardian, and others on the left have made this argument, and I think it's sound, is that broadly these industrialized Western nations like Japan, like the United States, like the UK, are experiencing a level of deindustrialization. In other words, the economy is reaching the point where the assembly jobs are moving offshore, and technology is taking a lot of those jobs. Now, I think the foreign competition is overstated. I mean, if you look, for example, at coal mining jobs, the number of coal mining jobs has dropped, not because those jobs have been exported to China, but because they've been replaced with technology. But be that as it may, that is a profound threat to the foundational structure of the middle class in these industrialized nations.
Right.
This erosion, this deindustrialization. And they react, and they can react in one of two ways. They can turn left, to the Bernie Sandersites, that want to increase state power.
Right.
And say, they want to address directly the needs of these populations, or they can turn to xenophobia. And this is what we've seen, and this is why, in a way, the immigrants are almost like an easy target because they're more visible. It's a little bit harder to say, I hate robots and I hate industrial capitalism and I hate big multinational corporations than it is to say that damn Mexican took my job.
Right. Easier to digest.
It's a little bit easier to see, and
still a horrible idea. But
the irony is that Brexit isn't going to change the refugee problem in Europe. It's not going to change the fact that England has thousands of Middle Eastern refugees from the war in Syria piling up in Calais, waiting to, in Dunkirk and in northern France, waiting to try to get into England.
Ted, this we talked about this a little bit on the last show, or maybe it was one before that, I don't remember. But my question was, do you think, me and Dan talked about it, that this has an effect on Trump, or Trump had an effect on Brexit? And I'm wondering what you think about that, because they seem linked to me, and we do need to wrap up. And by the way, you can find these episodes on YouTube now. You can go there and watch
excellent.
them. So,
yeah, I think they're absolutely linked. I think you're seeing this also in Australia with the far-right party gaining power there. This is nothing ever happens.
Scandinavia, Northern Europe.
Yeah.
There's a political dimension I want to get into maybe after a break, but
I think the real interesting part as a historian, if you are one, is I think we've gone through different periods, like a Keynesian period after World War II, Cold War liberalism
sort
of happened 45 to 75, and then neoliberalism is another huge economic period. It seems like those two periods, that's coming to an end, and I don't know what's going to formulate out of that. It could slide into this anti-democratic populism of Trump and the Brexit folks, the United Kingdom Independent Party. Or it could go into the other direction, which I would say is much preferable, into addressing some of these major economic and social problems, which I think are leading to this anxiety and fear that we're seeing across the country.
Bernie Bro. Is Bernie Bro perspective?
Well, let's leave it there, and then we'll come back.
Right.
John's got to go, but maybe we can get somebody to run the board.
Sure. The conversation will continue, but I'm going to head out. Follow us on Twitter at Mountain State Up. And you can also find these episodes on YouTube now. I make sure that I link to them on the Twitter. You go to the Twitter page at Mountain State Up, and you can find the link to the YouTube channel where all these are. So thanks for coming in, Ted Boettner and Dan Heyman. But we'll be back next Sunday on WTSQ 88.1 in Charleston and live at WTSQ.org.